Hi.
Hi there. Let's see. I'm trying to get things set up, and
See if it works.
looks like
Says
maybe
we're live.
we kind of fixed that there.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
I'm Thomas Ritter, and
I'm
this is
Shana
my
Ritter.
wife, Shana. So we
Let's let people file in. We don't have anyone on yet.
We will give you a minute to sign on and let us know when you're there.
Yeah, comment when you're here. We had some trouble getting on. It was we were supposed to click. There were some technology issues. Still trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
This is all new to us too.
Yeah.
So look, people are filing in.
4,
Awesome.
5. Hey.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. Let us know who you are. Let us know where you are.
yeah, please comment below. Say hi. Let us know if you can hear us okay, if we need to speak louder.
Yeah.
Or quieter, or just shut up.
There's a thumbs up.
We
Thank
got a
you.
thumbs up. Thank you. Yeah. Hearts are good too.
10 people here. Yeah, let us know where you are. 11 people. That's great.
We'll let everyone file in for a few minutes. If anybody wants to comment, say where you are, what you're doing.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
it was exciting last time, a couple of days ago when we did it the first time, how many people there were from the US and from Australia and Holland and England and Austria and Germany and Switzerland. Lots of old friends from, hey, J. Elliott Black. Hi. Hi, Jay.
Hi. Hey, my brother's on. Hi.
Very nice.
And yeah, so there were people that watched it. Most of them, I think, watched the recording.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
from all over the place. That was awesome. Hello.
Marianne. Hi, in Kiel.
Hello,
Maria
Marianne.
Bost
Hello,
from Munich. Oh, wow, cool.
Maria.
Maria Bost, yeah, hi, very good.
Hi.
Very good.
Great. People are filing in. Good,
Yeah, so
good. The numbers
26,
are going up.
yeah, very good. Excellent.
It takes a few minutes for people to figure this out.
Yeah,
This is new to all of us.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah, Facebook Live hasn't been around very long yet, and it's
figuring out
just
how
starting
to
to
use
catch
it.
on.
They need to make it the transition smoother to get into it.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. So 28 people, 29. Yeah, yeah, you go. Lots
Hey.
of thumbs up. Excellent.
Hey, let's
31. Yay.
Hi,
Sonia Hillen.
everybody. We'll get started in just
Munich
a minute.
too.
We just want to give
Hi.
people a chance to
Yeah,
file in.
35. Katrin Schönert. Hi, Katrin.
Hi.
Yeah, friends are signing on. That's nice. Friends and family are coming.
Hi, Jenny.
Yeah. Montana. Wow. Frigid. Yeah, thank God it's not that cold here. Nicole Rudolph. Hi. Hi, Nicole.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, that's great.
This
Hi,
is great.
Katrin. Hi.
Okay, so the numbers keep going up. This is great. Okay,
37,
so
yeah.
maybe we'll go ahead and get started. We are here for our first Facebook Live actual event. The other one was just kind of a trial to say hi.
Nor just joined. Hi.
Hi, Nor.
Carolita from Freiburg. Hi. I'm going to be in Freiburg tomorrow for a clinic for the next weekend. This coming weekend.
Anyway, so we are here to talk to you about what to do when your horse won't go forward, but we have 3 more scheduled. And let me give you those dates and times, just so you know. On Tuesday, December 20th, we're going to go into the 3 toolboxes that every rider needs. On Thursday, December 22nd, we'll go into how to move up the levels, the 6 different types of exercises you need to use. And on Monday, December 26th, Monotony Kills, how to infuse inspiration and creativity into your writing. All of these are going to be at 12 o'clock noon Pacific time, 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, and 9 p.m. Germany, here where we are now. And if you live somewhere else, you're going to have to convert that because I couldn't possibly list all the times. And so before we dive in, though, we have a bonus for you, for everybody that's here watching. We have prepared a summary and checklist into a bonus PDF for you, which you can download at www.artisticdressage.com/bonus. BONUS. If you can't figure that out, just message one of us or email us and we'll get it to you. So, and we'll repeat that again at the end, and afterwards I will also put a link to that in the comments for you.
Hi, Kristen from British Columbia and Reinhard from Hollerbrunn, Austria. Hi, nice
Hi,
of you
everyone.
to check in. It's great. Somebody from Norway was there, checked in. That's great. All over the world. That's Amazing. It's amazing how that works, huh?
And
So,
our kids are quiet.
yeah.
And
Say
yes,
hello.
they're awake because they don't sleep. They're like him, and they
Yeah.
don't sleep.
Yeah, sleep is overrated. Schwäbische Alb, rote Bialas. Hi. Excellent.
Okay,
So,
so I guess, Thomas, you can go ahead
Yeah.
and dive in. This is, again, what do I do when my horse won't go forward?
yeah, that's a question that somebody sent in, a reader of our newsletter, and it's one of those situations that everybody has experienced. If you have ridden enough horses, you've been there, and you know how frustrating that is, and how helpless you feel, and how incompetent you feel. And it's a question that comes up, or a problem that comes up in clinic lessons. And so those of you who teach, you've encountered that with your students, and then you need to find a solution, right? And the traditional thing that most people do is that first they drive more, and then the horse probably goes forward even less. And then you drive some more, and then it gets worse, and it gets worse.
And they kick, and they, you know, push with their body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the more strength you use for the aids, the more you seize up and you get stiffer and tighter, and you actually slow the horse down, and then the horse braces against you, and then the more you drive, the less he goes, the more you drive. And I'm sure we've all been there. We've all tried that. That's why we know it doesn't work.
It just exacerbates the cause. I mean, it has a cause,
exactly.
and the cause is not that you're not doing this enough. The cause is something else, but doing that or whatever else you're trying to do just exacerbates the problem.
Yeah. Oh, South Africa. Wow, hi.
Wow.
Anyway, I get distracted. So this is a topic that you could, briefly talk about in 5 minutes, but you can also talk about it for an hour or two. So if I get carried away, let me know. If you get bored, let me know, then we'll cut it short.
And if you have questions, if it's quick, you just need clarification on something, you can put it in while he's talking. Otherwise, save it to the end, and if we have time, hopefully we'll have time, we'll get into some questions at the end.
Yeah, so the first place to start when you encounter a problem like this, or any problem really, is to remind yourself that what you're seeing is a symptom. It's not the actual cause. Most people kind of stay at the surface, and they try to work with the symptoms and try to fix the symptoms, but then that usually doesn't go very well. It's better if you try to think about, where does that come from? Why is the horse not going forward? Why is he sucking back? And there are always two main areas that you can look at. The first one is the rider's seat and aids. The other one is the horse himself. These two areas can be subdivided a little further, usually depending on what the issue is exactly and what you're dealing with. So I made a couple of lists, and you find them in the bonus. Oops.
That's a
Somebody had just asked, does this apply when the horse throws the outside shoulder? It's it can be connected, but it's a separate issue. What you're talking about is a straightness issue that we should talk about in a different session. So anyway, starting with a rider, it's always a good idea to. Oh, here's Amira. She's trying to help.
Amira has come to join us.
So it's always good to start with the rider's seat and aids before you try to fix something in the horse. It's always good to check if there's something you could change in what you're doing. And so I can think of 8 or 9 things off the top of my head that can cause the horse to suck back and not respond to a driving aid. The first one that you need to look into is the core engagement. How much are you actually engaging your abs and your back muscles? And if you have too little core engagement, then usually a lot of other things happen too that are detrimental for the riding success. When your core muscles are unstable, not engaged enough, then your upper body can become wobbly, unstable. What you often see is that the front line of the body becomes concave. People slump over a little bit. The back line becomes convex, and then you have no real influence in your seat over the horse. Charles de Canfi always likes to talk about the authority of the seat, and when you have too little core muscle engagement, then your seat doesn't have much authority over the horse. And it's an issue that's very widespread. It's an issue that you find in people who spend a lot of time sitting at a desk, at a computer, sitting in a car, and so on. People who do a lot of sports, people who ride a lot of horses every day, they tend to have better core muscle engagement. That's why it can happen to you that if you're an amateur, your trainer rides the horse and the horse goes forward, everything goes well, and you get on the horse and he won't go forward. That usually has something to do with core muscle engagement. Another thing that can slow the horse down or get him behind the aids is if you tip forward with your upper body. That's something we saw a lot when we still had lesson horses, and we did a lot of lunge lessons, a lot of seat lessons, and that was a common one. People would tip forward and the horses would stop, and they wouldn't be able to keep them in the trot. And of course, the first reaction of the rider then is kick the horse, make him go forward, and then I had to remind them first, take your foot off the brake before you step on the gas. So fix your seat in the area that may be hindering the horse, maybe getting in the horse's way, so that has a sort of a slowing down, braking effect. And then when you're no longer interfering with the horse, then you can start driving. Otherwise, it's a little bit like stepping on the brake of the car and the gas pedal at the same time. There are people who can ride with the upper body in front of the vertical and still make it work. The way they do it is usually they use a lot more back muscle engagement. If you're in front of the vertical with your upper body, you need to use your back muscles a lot more. If you ride a little bit slightly behind the vertical, you need to use your abs more. And the really good riders tend to develop their own seat and peculiarities and their own technique and so on. So you'll find really good riders that have their upper body relatively far back. You have others that are relatively far forward, and there are ways to compensate for that, but it's better not to emulate the idiosyncrasies of the really good riders. It's better to try to stay relatively close to the vertical when you're riding. So tipping forward can put the horse's withers basically into the ground. You can push the horse's withers into the ground if you lean forward too much. Another thing is, another factor that can slow the horse down is letting your pelvis tip forward. So when you hollow your back, that's usually something that has to do with not enough abdominal muscle engagement. Then the torso, that the pelvis tips forward, and that is often connected to tight hips, for example. There are a lot of these things then tie in to each other and cause each other and happen simultaneously. So if you tip forward with your pelvis because your abs are not engaged enough, then that will also put the horse on the forehand, get him behind the seat, get him behind the leg, and the horse may stop. And there are horses that are extremely sensitive to that. We've ridden horses that seem to respond as soon as your upper body or your pelvis was like a millimeter too far forward, and they would stop and go backwards or refuse to go forward. So if you have one of those horses that are especially sensitive to these tiny little adjustments of the seat, then the horse trains you very well to sit straight and have your core muscles engaged and so on. And I should also add, the taller the rider and the smaller the horse, the more this will impact the horse. If you're 6 feet tall and you ride a horse that's like 15 hands or 15.2 or something, or 16 hands, you have a lot more leverage and a lot more weight that will influence the horse than if you're 5 feet 2 and you're riding an 18-hand horse. So the tall riders and small horses have to be a lot more precise and careful with their seat. So the next thing, point number 4 here, is stiff rider's hips. That's usually something that has to do with tight hip flexors, and tight hip flexors often come hand in hand with insufficient core muscle engagement. Tight hip flexors is again sort of an illness of our time. People who sit a lot in the car at a desk and so on, they tend to have very tight psoas muscles. These are things that you can address, of course, on the ground by doing physical therapy and sports and stretching and yoga and all kinds of things. So if your hip flexors are tight, your hips lose mobility and you won't be able to follow the horse's movement. And if you can't follow the horse's back movement with your pelvis, you essentially put on the brakes too on the horse. If he can't swing in his back up and down, he won't be able to move his hind legs because they're tied together as well. So point number 5, stiff wrists. That's also something that happens usually when the core muscles are not engaged enough and your rein contact, your rein aids are not supported by your body weight and by your seat. Then your arm muscles tend to become stiff, the shoulders, the elbows, the wrists, the fingers, and any stiffness in those areas will create stiffness and bracing in the throat latch area of the horse, the poll, the middle of the neck sometimes, the under neck, and that also has a slowing down effect on the horse. So those are things you need to check if your horse doesn't want to go forward, seems not to want to go forward, right? Then gripping legs is another one. That gripping legs can cause a horse to slow down, but of course a horse that won't go forward causes gripping legs in a way that's like chicken and the egg. That reminds me of a lesson I did years ago with a lady who had exactly that problem, and then after experimenting with a few things, I ended up walking next to her and put my hand under her calf to see how she was driving, because it was clearly not working. The horse was not responding to the aids. And then I found out that she had a death grip with her calves. I mean, she almost squeezed the blood out of my hands. And the other thing that I found out is that the timing was completely wrong. For every aid that you apply, there's a certain moment in the footfall sequence where the horse can act on that aid and execute it and let it go through his body. And if you apply the aid at the wrong time, then you may have a negative effect, and the horse may not respond at all. The horse may brace, the horse may refuse to respond, so to speak, and you can get into an argument with the horse. And if you fix the timing, all the resistance may go away. So leg aids, to be effective, should be quick. They need to come at the time when the hind leg is either just lifting off or just a split second before. It's the moment when the horse's rib cage touches your calf, because the rib cage swings a little bit like a pendulum back and forth. But if you apply a driving aid for 10 seconds and you use 100 pounds, then the horse will probably stop from that. So another thing that I see very often, point number 7 on my list, sitting too heavily. Of course, you're taught in your lessons sometimes you need to sit on your seat bones and so on. So people are good students and they do that. They sit on their seat bones. But by sitting with all your body weight on your seat bones, you can have an effect that you have your entire body weight on an area that's maybe this big on the left and on the right, and the pressure acts directly, the weight acts directly vertically from above onto the back of the horse. And if a horse is a little weak in the back, a little soft in the back, then it can happen that they drop their back and they find that sensation unpleasant. And on horses like that, you may have to spread your body weight out over a larger area. So you may have to actually let the body weight flow around the ribs of the horse and use the inner thighs a little bit as a support base. Those are things that you can find out by experimenting very easily. You can very easily vary the weight, shift it from the seat bones to the thighs, back to the seat bones, slowly, carefully, and you can monitor the horse's reaction, right? When the horse likes where you're sitting, he'll become round and soft, he'll go forward. If the horse doesn't like where you're sitting, he may drop the back, he may invert, he may stop going forward, and so on. So you can figure these things out in a dialogue with the horse. So you basically ask the horse questions and give him alternatives and say, do you prefer it if I sit here or if I sit there? Do you like it if I sit more on my seat bones, or do you like it better if I spread the weight out over a large area? Or do you like it better if I'm a little in front of the vertical, or do you like it if I'm in the vertical or behind the vertical? And yeah, every horse has his own preferences. So the weight distribution plays a big role, and there's a lot you can do with that. Then point number 8, tight glutes. A lot of people will pinch their butt cheeks together basically, and that lifts them out of the saddle, and the horses find that unpleasant because it's hard, it feels aggressive somehow, and then they will drop the back. And there are horses that react to that by running away, and there are other horses that react by stopping. So you need to be able to engage your muscles in a differentiated sort of way. So you maybe need to be able to engage one set of muscles and relax another set of muscles. And that is something that takes basically all your life to learn. Nobody ever reaches the end of that. In the beginning, when we first start out riding, we engage everything or nothing. It's sort of like a light switch on off, full blast or nothing, or I engage all the muscles and then I don't engage any muscles. And as you get more experience, as you learn more, as you practice more, you learn to engage individual muscles and relax other muscles. And that's often one of the differences between the really good riders and the beginners, that the really good riders have learned to differentiate between very many different muscles in the body, and they can very selectively engage individual ones but not others. So that's a brief overview over rider factors, and these are things that you can really work on your own, just by observing your own body, observing the horse's reaction, and then deliberately changing things in your seat, and then observing how the horse reacts to it. I often compare that in lessons a little bit to that children's game, where one person asks a question and the other one then says yes, warmer, or no, colder. Like warmer when you're getting closer to the solution, or colder when you're moving away from the right answer. And the horse will do the same. Every time you change anything in your seat and aids, the horse will change also. He will either get a little better or he'll get a little worse. So, and the horse trains you in that sense as much as you train the horse, and you just need to pay attention to those correlations between what you're doing and what the horse is doing. So sometimes when the horse is not doing what you would like him to do, then I like to tell people, you have to ask yourself, what did I do to deserve that, so to speak? Because often you don't actually feel what you did in your body, but you feel the horse's reaction, and that can be drastic sometimes. So if you try to think back on what did I do, one stride before it happened, 2 strides, 3 strides, and so on, then you eventually will see the connection. And if you get on your horse and right off the bat he doesn't want to, hold on, what about the down step into the stirrup? Yeah, the stirrup pressure is a weight aid, but that tends to have a slowing down effect. So when a horse doesn't want to go forward, then you have to be careful with that. But so there are cases too where you get on the horse and right off the bat he doesn't want to go forward at all. Then it's not something you just caused, it's not a change you created, but it's something that's already present, and then you have to experiment a little bit with different things that may hopefully make the situation better. But not all the causes for sucking back are the rider's fault. A lot of them are, but not all of them are. There are also things in the horse himself. So the first thing you may have to check is pain. So if a horse really absolutely refuses to go forward, and if he becomes really militant and aggressive, if you try to quote unquote make him go forward, then you have to suspect that there's a pain issue somewhere in the back or in one of the legs or something, and you may have to have a vet check the horse out just to make sure. Then saddle fitting can be a problem, of course, and these kinds of things, teeth, bits, and so on. But if you can rule out pain, one factor in the horse that very often causes the sucking back and the stopping are tense and braced abdominal muscles. There are certain types of horses that do that a lot, and when the abdominal muscles of the horse are tense and braced, then these horses usually don't like calf contact and calf aids very much. So in those horses you may have to use your knees a little bit, a little impulse from your knees as a driving aid, and you may have more luck with the vibration of the whip Also, again, the good core engagement will help in those cases. And you can supple these abdominal muscles with combinations of voltes and figure eights and shoulder in type of lateral movements, especially things that involve lots of changes of bend, like after a volte right or shoulder in left, and that sort of thing. That very often helps in getting the abdominal muscles looser. Trot canter transitions if you can, if the horse will do that, if he's not so sucked back that you can't even get that. Another factor that makes the horse get behind the seat and aid are muscle blockages in the neck and the poll, for example. That's a very interesting thing. If the horse has really hard, stiff muscles in the neck or the poll, that really blocks the energy flow from the hind legs, and then it will show up as being unresponsive to the leg. But the cause is actually a stiffness in the neck or poll. And as soon as you get rid of that tension in the neck or the poll, all of a sudden you'll find that he will go forward maybe all by himself, and you don't have to drive anymore, or very little anyway. And resistances in the neck and poll you can often remove through flexions on the ground and in the saddle and so on. Those muscle tensions in the neck and the poll often have to do with conformation. So the horses that have a difficult poll, short thick poll maybe, or a short thick neck, they tend to lock up a little in the neck. But that's something you can get rid of with flexions often. Another factor that can make the horse stop and go backwards, for example, is excessive elevation, especially if you have a horse with a neck that is set on low and maybe a little short and so on. And that high elevation, if the horse is not ready, if the hind legs are not flexible enough yet, that will put a lot of pressure on the hind legs and the back, and then that can basically suppress the pushing power and the horse's desire to go forward. So that's something to check also. Core muscles in the horse are a factor as well. So if the horse doesn't engage his own core muscles enough, then that will also lead to dropping the back and not wanting to go forward. Then, conformational issues often play a role. Shana's back. The kids are back. It's to sleep.
Mira's asleep. Mission accomplished.
Yeah. So anyway, horses that have a long, weak back, they often are very sensitive to the seat, to the weight, and that often can make them suck back as well. So you see that sometimes in some of the driving breeds, that they have a long, weak back, and then the hind legs maybe are built out a little behind, and then they have a neck that is set on high, very long, and so those problems, they exacerbate each other. Hind legs that are out behind conformationally, they don't support the back. The long, weak back is not well suited for carrying weight, and then high set neck already has natural elevation that puts pressure onto the back and the hind end, and since the hind end doesn't support the back enough, the back will drop in the middle, and you feel like you're sitting in a hammock. It's very unpleasant. So it's like the croup is up, the head is up, and you're sitting in a hole in the middle. Very, very unpleasant. So those horses are tricky to ride. Sickle hocks, by the way. So horses that have a very sort of sharp angle in the hind leg joints, they are built for carrying, not so much for pushing, and that can also lead to the horses not going forward because the hind legs are overburdened. And check saddle fit. Yes, I mentioned that briefly earlier. It's true. So it's good to cover all your bases. Check if the saddle fits. Check
it can
if
be a factor.
it absolutely can make the horse suck back and not want to go forward. Sickle hocks and so on. So it's always good to look at your horse's conformation. Every horse has good points and bad points in the conformation, and sometimes a weak spot can be compensated by a strength somewhere else, but sometimes you have horses where several weak spots make each other worse, so to speak. They exacerbate each other, and you have to be aware of that. And even though you love your horse and everything, you need to have a somewhat objective picture of the horse too, so you're not expecting things of your horse that he simply can't do because he's not built for it. You can always
It's only fair.
Yeah.
Because you love your horse, you need
Exactly.
to have an objective perspective.
Yeah. So, dressage, of course, is physiotherapy too. So if you have a horse that has weak areas in the conformation, you can improve them with dressage. But in order to be able to help your horse with dressage, in gymnastic training, you have to know what those weaknesses are, and you have to know how to fix that. What exercises you could use to fix it. So it's always good to look at conformation, look at how the horse stands in the barn aisle, look how the horse moves when he's at liberty. So you get a pretty good impression of what the natural gaits look like, and so you get a feeling for what you can improve, where you can help the horse. For me personally, dressage over the years has become more and more kind of a physical therapy thing that I use to help the horses balance themselves better, carry the rider more easily, more comfortably.
To feel better, just feel better.
To feel better, exactly. Feel comfortable under the rider.
And not just physically, just to feel better, mind, body, spirit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when the horse is balanced and he feels comfortable under the rider, he's at ease, then a lot of the more advanced movements become possible too. So, but that balance and suppleness is something that occupies a pretty high priority, and that goes back basically to the old masters. Long before there was a training pyramid, the old masters already said that balance and flexibility are the cornerstones of dressage, and that really stuck with me when I read that. That realization is like 200 years old or more, and it's still very true today, even though horses today look a little different than the horses they had 200 years ago in some ways, but in some fundamentals they're still the same. So point number 7, that's like the last one on my list here as far as the horse is concerned, is unresponsiveness to the aid. So there's always this element of tuning the horse. You can teach your horse to respond better to your driving aids, and that's where the whip plays an important role. The mistake that many people make is that they think using the whip is unkind, so they rather squeeze and grip and kick their horse, and then sooner or later they get frustrated because it doesn't work, and then they whack the horse really hard. And then the horse will either take one quicker step and then they go right back to what they were doing, or they buck you off, which would be fair in a way if you do that. So it's much kinder to the horse, much clearer if you apply a normal light calf aid, and if the horse doesn't react, maybe apply a second one, and if he still doesn't react, then touch him with the weight of your whip to tell him, watch out, I'm going to talk to you here at this point of your body, and then you start vibrating with the whip, lightly but quickly. It's the speed of the vibration and the energy behind it that will create movement in the horse. And if that doesn't do the job, then you can vibrate a little quicker, you can vibrate a little with more energy, so it becomes a little more unpleasant. So it's like an escalation in a sense, and the horse, as soon as the horse shows a sign of cooperation and moves a little bit more, you stop with a whip, and you can pet him and you can talk to him, tell him good boy or whatever, so that he knows that's what you wanted, right? And then
so it's really clear, that's fair.
It's very clear, exactly. The horse then controls how fast, how intense the vibration becomes. They're smart, they figure that out pretty quickly, that the sooner they respond to the leg, the less you use the whip. And it's not about hurting the horse or hitting the horse or something. It's really a vibration. It's a skill that you have to learn. You have to have a suppleness in your wrist and fingers, because that's where that vibration comes from.
And it's about irritation more than pain.
Exactly.
It's about agitating the horse just enough. It's not so much about causing pain. It's about making the horse just a little bit edgier, a little bit more agitated, so that he will react. Yeah. And that's what you're looking for.
Exactly. So you can fine-tune your horse, and the whip plays an important role in fine-tuning the horse to calf aid, so that they... where on the horse do you use the whip? Somebody asks.
No, it depends.
Behind the leg usually. If I want to create movement, I use it behind the leg. You can use it right behind the calf. You can use it on the side of the hip. That works too. Shoulder wouldn't be so suitable for this particular purpose. Touching the shoulder would be better for framing the shoulder, moving the shoulder, turning the shoulder, that sort of thing.
For other things it can be useful.
Exactly. And the material of the whip plays a role. I think a lot of people don't pay enough attention to that. So you need a whip that can vibrate with a certain speed, and it has to be able to transmit a certain energy. If you have a really stiff whip, then it doesn't vibrate at all. It's dead, basically. And that's something that is useful sometimes for the very hot horses that would overreact otherwise. You can just then lay the whip on the horse, and that's enough if you even need a whip on that horse. If the whip is too soft, or the end of the whip is too soft, then it becomes very slow. It's like trying to use a wet noodle, and just there's no movement, there's no energy. It's useless, basically. So it has to have a firmness in the handle. It has to have a certain, like I said, a certain flexibility, so that you can determine determine where you touch the horse, when you touch the horse. That's also a factor. If the whip is too slow, you can't really determine exactly when and where the whip touches the horse, and then that makes it useless too. And there has to be a certain energy behind it, behind the speed, and then the horses move from that, because it's slightly annoying and slightly irritating. It doesn't hurt, but it's slightly irritating. And then as soon as they move, stop with the whip, praise the horse, and then next time you try just with your leg. Another thing, by the way, that just comes to my mind is that a lot of people with these unresponsive horses, they use maximum force right away, because they say, well, the horse is lazy, he doesn't react anyway, so I need to use all I've got right away. And then you don't give your horse a chance to do it better. You don't give the horse a chance to do it correctly, so to speak. So even if you know that your horse is not going to respond to a small aid, start with a small aid anyway. Give him the chance.
And it's funny, they might surprise you.
Exactly.
I've ridden a number of horses that act really dull, that invite you to use bigger aids than you want to use. They invite you to work harder and harder and harder. And those horses, if you actually lessen your normal aids by half, it's like whisper, somebody will listen, right? If you whisper, somebody will listen. It's the same thing with the horse. If you get really light, the horse will actually sometimes react way more than you expect. Yeah. They're really smart.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. If somebody's used to being yelled at, they tune out. They don't listen anymore. And it's the same with the horses. And if you whisper, suddenly their ears perk up, and they start to pay attention. That's very important. And you always need to start with a very soft, very light aid, and then you can gradually increase it. Another thing that plays a role here that I should mention is that when I was a beginner, we were always taught that you drive rhythmically every stride. And of course, that's the fastest way to make your horse dull and unresponsive.
I mean, if I do this all the time, pretty soon he's going to...
Exactly.
Well, he might slap me, but... or he might... You better not. But he'll probably tune me out. Pretty soon he won't notice that I've been doing this, right? Same thing with the horse. Yeah,
so I compare it to a dripping faucet. It drives you nuts first because you hear the dripping, and then eventually you don't hear it, and then you don't care.
Right, or a ticking clock that's in your house. Exactly. If you live in the house, you're used to it, you don't even hear it anymore.
So you just let your legs rest against the horse's side. They provide lateral guidance, and they frame. And if you feel like, okay, now the energy level is dropping a little below a certain critical level, then you remind your horse, keep moving, maintain that energy level. It's a little bit like maintaining a certain number of rounds per minute in your car, in the engine. And if it drops below that, you step on the gas a little bit. But then the horse has to continue on his own. He needs to maintain that energy and that tempo and the stride length and all the parameters that you set for him. That's the goal, because otherwise it's too much work for the rider. So the horse needs to maintain those parameters, and then you remind him when he changes something that you didn't want to change. Then you tell him, no, keep going, stay at that level. And so gradually you need the aids a little less and less.
Yeah, like boiling a frog.
Yeah, exactly.
John
Hold on there.
Fitch.
Yeah, there was somebody, a good question. Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes hard to get the whip around my boot. That's true. In order to be able to touch the horse's side with your whip, you may have to change your hand position. You may have to move your hand a little out to the side.
It often has to open a little bit to
exactly.
the side.
And that's of course it's another skill you have to learn, that you move your hand to a different position without interfering with the rein contact. So don't pull on the rein while you're doing something with the whip, or don't jerk on the rein.
This would
while
defeat the purpose,
yeah,
right?
that would be unfair. That would be contradiction, right? So it still takes a certain technique, takes a certain practice, you know, and so you keep the same amount of tension on the rein or the same amount of contact, and just move your hand a little to the side so you feel like your whip can now touch the horse's belly. And you need to be able, by the way, to feel the horse's belly with your whip. That's something you can try out when you ride the next time. See if you
Can just
take,
rest
yeah,
the whip
exactly.
on the horse and feel how much
See
pressure.
if you can exactly feel the body of the horse through the whip. The whip is an extension of your body. It's an extension of your arm, basically. Yeah. And then also, next thing, even a little higher level, would be try to feel the muscle tension on the horse. Does the horse at the end of the whip feel soft, or does it feel hard? That's pretty sophisticated, but you can actually do that. But of course, you won't feel it if you don't look for it, if you don't actually try it. There's a lot of things you can feel, a lot of things you can do if you know where to look and if you know what to experiment with, and then you find a lot of very interesting things.
It gives you important clues, you know.
Yeah,
is the horse receptive to my aid, or is he repelling it? Is he pushing it away or hardening against it? That tells you a lot.
Yeah. And that's something that goes for all the aids, actually. You know, the aids are like a two-way radio. You receive information. That's why it's important also to touch the horse with your calf. Don't have the leg somewhere hanging in the air, but feel the horse's side. Make contact with the horse's side, because you feel the movement of the rib cage, you feel the movement of the hind legs, and you feel the muscle tone. Some horses are so hard and braced.
Sorry, it wiggles.
Yeah. Some horses are so hard and braced with the belly muscles that it feels almost like you're straddling a car door. It's like metal, you know. That's very unpleasant, not good at all. And you have to try. But those are horses often that are used to gripping legs, by the way. When it's good, when the horse is soft and relaxed, the horse's belly feels soft and warm. And it's one of my old teachers used to say you should feel the warmth of the horse's belly through the calf of your boot. And speaking of boots, it's not good if the boot is so hard and rigid, like a stovepipe, that you can't feel anything. That's, you know, some people really like these really hard, rigid boots because they look cool, they look very elegant, but you can't feel anything. In terms of feeling, riding, training, they're useless, actually.
You can't give your leg aids with any subtlety, and you can't receive anything. There's information you receive through the contact of the leg on the horse's side, and when the boot is too rigid, too hard, you can't feel that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and they're well-made tall boots that are stiffer on the outside and softer on the inside. They have maybe just one thin layer, one soft layer of leather on the inside of the calf, and then they're a little more stable on the outside. So those are good boots. But that we digress. I mean, we've basically reached the end of our two lists. As you can see, we could continue forever.
We could keep talking forever
about these things, and maybe we'll do it some other time.
But we could take some questions. If somebody has some questions, let me make sure this is... Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Denise Pool's not done experiments as to where the best place to tap. That's excellent. Experiment by all means, because you may find it's a different place on different horses.
Use of the spur versus whip.
That's also a good one, yeah. There are horses that will suck back when you use the whip with a vibration like I described. That's bad because it takes away an important tool. But they then sometimes respond better to a little spur pressure right behind, quick, short behind the girth. Otherwise, the spur is a great tool for supporting the sidestepping in lateral movements. It's a great tool for also suppling the rib cage. Different tool has a little different application, but you can also use it sometimes for activating the hind leg more.
So supporting the double bridle.
Spur has a number of different uses, and some of them overlap with the whip, and some of them are a little bit different. Yeah, so but Denise, I like the experimenting. Experimenting is very important. You learn a lot from experimenting. It's like anytime you do anything, the horse will react, right? He'll get better or he'll get worse. And then we'll make mistakes, of course, but most of them are not fatal, you know. Most of them, will make the horse brace and invert a little, but you can change it, and then he'll be round and soft again. So it's not a big deal usually. The worst thing you can do is to be so afraid of making mistakes that you don't dare do anything because then you keep doing the same thing, hoping that you'll get a different result, and that's the fastest way to fail. Get really stuck spinning your wheel. So experiment something. You dare to make a mistake, and just be smart about it, and check in with the horse. So what do you think of that? What do you think of that? And the horse will tell you. The horse will essentially tell you how he would like to be ridden, right? He'll tell you how you need to sit. He will tell you what kind of aids he likes, and so on and so forth. And you learn with the horse in a dialogue. And there's a lot you can do actually outside of a lesson, just with the horse. Quiet time in the arena. Do you think the communal riding is a good way to work with? Well, the different traditions, and they all have something good to offer. Every good rider has discovered some truths, so to speak, that are based on natural laws and the nature of the horse. It's good when you're starting out to pick a tradition and learn how it works, and then start looking outside of the tradition too. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, so I don't want to recommend anything in particular. My own background is sort of that Spanish riding school tradition and the old German military tradition, but there is a lot of valuable stuff in French dressage, in Portuguese and Spanish dressage. I've stolen from them too. So as long as it's based on biomechanics and psychology and on the horse's nature, it's all good, It has to work for the horse, son. So each tradition has its strengths and its weaknesses. So it's good to be rooted in a certain tradition, but it's good at some point also to, leave that box behind and see, where the weak areas of that tradition are that you come from, and see if you can't find a better way to do it. So basically, it's a long process. It's a long, lots of trial, lots of error. Lots of experimenting. So there's a certain rigidity in the mindset of most riders, and it's just a tradition that it's like a religion oftentimes, right? So I have the only truth, and everybody else is going straight to hell, and it's not quite that, right? It's a lot more differentiated, and as you grow up as a rider, so to speak, you have to. Or you can try to make your own philosophy and your own system by learning the positive things from the different traditions you come in contact with, and then trying to discard the negative aspects of them. Let me see, another question, Kyle Fisher. How do you gauge the extent of a physical workout, and how far to take riding before horse is tired and cannot carry himself? You end lessons or push just past it? Good question. Good question. Of course, the energy, strength, and so on is a finite resource. So the horse will get tired at some point, just like we get tired too. If you work out in the gym, if you do whatever sit-ups or work with some machine or weights, there's so many reps you can do, and then your muscles start aching. So what do? Do you push past it, or do you say, I'm going to have a beer now, I'm going to take a break? So
the problem with pushing past it is that your form suffers and you risk injury, and same for the horse.
Exactly, and you can also make the horse not enjoy the training anymore.
Yeah, he won't be so willing to give you everything he's got.
Exactly.
If you expect everything he's got, expect him to give you everything, his full effort, and you abuse that, next time he's going to only give you part of that. He'll hold back some because he doesn't trust that you will take care of him. What you often see is that as you start riding in your lesson or your session, the horse gets better and better, and all of a sudden you reach a point where it seems to get worse, and no matter what you do, it just doesn't get any better anymore. And that's usually a clear sign that the horse either needs a break or that you need to end the session. Right, you can try just giving a break and then trying to go back to it and see how it is. If it's not better, maybe just find something you can end on a good note, even if it's the simplest request. Yeah. Just so you ended it on a good note. One thing. And make note of it, because there's often signs there that the horse was degrading in strength. And as you get to know your horse, you'll see these more and more.
Exactly.
And you'll know it in advance, so you don't take the horse to that point where he's fatigued.
Yeah, and you need to sharpen your awareness to how the horse is feeling, so that you notice fatigue setting in because we get so wrapped up in your own thing. We're busy and we're ambitious and we want to
I
accomplish
need
something.
to get this done.
And then we may not notice the warning signs. It's in some ways easier when you work with a trainer because the trainer on the ground is more detached. He sees the whole picture or she, and they can then tell the rider, now it's time for a break, because the rider, like I said, is so wrapped up and doesn't have that critical distance that is so helpful sometimes, and then the person on the ground has that a little more. Also, an interesting thing is that when we ride exercises, I work a lot with gymnastic exercises that change the position, that change the weight distribution, that change the posture of the horse. And when you change the posture and the weight distribution, you're changing the muscles that the horse is using. In other words, you may turn on muscles that the horse didn't know he had. You may get muscles to relax that were always braced. And if the horse now has to use a set of muscles that he's never used before, he will get tired sooner. It's also something that happened to me years ago. There was a lady with an Arab, I think, and that horse could, of course, jig through the prairie there for hours and hours without getting tired. But after like 20 or 30 minutes having to go through the back and on the bit and so on in a different posture, the horse was tired, and she couldn't believe it. She had laughed at me when I had suggested that the horse might be getting tired at some point. She couldn't imagine that because she hadn't experienced it. But if the horse uses different muscles than he's used to using, he gets tired. And it happens in lessons with me a lot when the horses have to balance themselves better. They have to engage their core muscles more. They have to use the hind end more, and so on. And don't be surprised if the horse needs more frequent breaks, or if the horse is done, after 20 or 30 minutes. So, and then you need to just respect that and give the horse a break. And if you feel like, well, even after a break, it's not really better, then finish.
And just like us, sometimes the horses poop out earlier some days. They just don't have as much, so you need to stay attentive and mindful and aware and compassionate towards your horse. Yeah. We're getting lots of nice thank yous. Thank you, everybody. Any advice for a horse that responds but tail swishes at the whip?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Then you would have to find out where it comes from. I mean, maybe he swishes the tail because you're driving with the whip, but at the same time, maybe something is slowing him down. Maybe
tightening up, the hips could be tightening.
Exactly.
You could be tipping forward. There could be something, some contradiction. The horse is saying something's not right. So you have to become a detective and find out what's going on, what this means. Yeah. It can be any number of things. That would be a great topic for a whole other one. Lots of
Diane Toniscutter. Hi Diane.
Hi Diane.
So you say I have now had to use a light leg aid backed up with more leg and then whip to get my 18-year-old Prince George horse tuned to go forward. Is this possibly normal for some horses? Well, horses are very different from individual to individual. I mean, you could use a light aid, then a light leg aid, little stronger leg aid, and then the whip.
You have to find what this horse needs.
You have to find out what he responds to best. Yeah, exactly.
And good for you for listening to your horse and finding what he responds best to.
Exactly. Oops. Oh, we post your favorite quotes.
Oh,
Angelica Harwell. Thank you. That's nice.
Mental stamina versus physical stamina.
Oh, that's a good one. L. Wakefield. That's a great question. Mental stamina versus physical stamina. Yeah. That's very true. I mean, riding is a thinking sport. Yeah, it's a thinking sport for the horse, and we always
and for the rider.
Thinking horse, thinking rider. I know the old masters talked about that a lot, and it's very true. I mean, you're training the horse's brain as much as the body. Yeah. And when you feel like they can't focus anymore, it's time to take a break or time to end the session. Absolutely. I mean, it's same as with the physical stamina.
And just like with physical strength, it's something that can be built, something that can be developed. The horse will develop more mental strength and agility over time.
Yeah, exactly. There's a mental flexibility issue too. That's something that comes up in lessons. If horses were trained with a 10,000 circles method, and then you ask them to do something different patterns in exercise in different areas where they're not used to them, they're very surprised, and they don't recognize them sometimes. And so there has to be a certain mental flexibility that has to be trained for the rider too. And I always tell my students that mental flexibility has to precede physical flexibility. Like the horse can't be physically as flexible as I would like him to be if he's not mentally flexible. If he can't picture, right, yeah, if he can't if the horse can't imagine doing a shoulder in anywhere else but on the long side, then he's not mentally flexible, but then he won't be really physically flexible either. Because as soon as you want to make a turn or ride this movement somewhere else, then you get into trouble.
So in a way, first you have to access the horse's mind before his body.
Exactly.
So let's see, we probably have some more down here.
Oops, is it possible to post the tool
in
written form?
Yeah, Jim, we actually have it as a download PDF at www.artisticdressage.com/bonus.
Yeah, it's even better so you can download it.
Yeah, you can just download it, and it's the summary of what he's talked about today and the checklists.
Yeah,
so
by the way,
these
checklists I basically came up with in like 5 or 10 minutes. These are the top of my mind, because I run into those all the time in teaching and training, but they are not necessarily complete. So you might come up with your own items that you might want to put on that list, and if you have any other ones, you can leave them in the comment section or something. That's an interesting thing to look at, what other people have experienced.
Lots of thank yous.
You think about any advice on mares that are kind of difficult? Like we can be fine for weeks and just suddenly she blocks everything and I feel like I can't do anything right. Well, that's why they used to ride stallions in the past. But it's true. Mares can be a little more complex, and if it's good for a few weeks and then it's not, check the cycle. Maybe
track it for a while. Track it over the course of a couple months or even a year to see if there seems to be a cycle there, and so then you can know. Maybe then she's coming into heat or whatever phase of her cycle. Exactly, if it's her cycle, and often it is with mares. And then okay, well let's maybe ease up a little bit, do something else, find something so that you two can meet.
Exactly. Then there are other external factors. Check the weather. Some horses have funny reactions to weather. Sometimes, like older horses, when a storm is coming in and the barometric pressure changes, like 24 to 48 hours before that, they suddenly go really badly.
That's like me.
They feel their arthritis. And so that can be a factor. We've also experienced it when storms were coming that all the horses in the barn were weird. They're just not themselves. Mentally, they were just strange. And on those days, it was actually better not to ride and just wait.
Yeah, you notice after a few horses that, they're all kind of weird today. What's going on? And and so then you listen to the horses. Back off, do something lighter, or just turn them out maybe that day, or hand graze them, something.
Sometimes the training progresses more by not training.
Yeah.
So it's just taking a day
joke with us.
Yeah. And another factor is feed. If you open a new bale of hay or anything changes in the feed, maybe they have a stomachache because the food didn't agree with them, stuff like that, food allergies, and there's a whole can of worms factors, that you can look at. Yeah.
Like people mentioned, the saddle fit, the health, the teeth, all of these factors, they all come into play. You have to look at the whole picture.
Exactly. So we could make a third area where you can look at different factors that would be the externals.
Definitely.
Like these
We didn't include that here, but it's valid.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the next. So I would start with the rider, then I would look at the horse, and if you still don't find anything, which in most cases you do, but if you don't find anything, then look at these external factors as well, like feed, weather, heat cycles. Oh, Lisa. Hi, Lisa Feischl. That's great, from Graz. And Sandy from Kern. Hi, Sandy.
Lots of our old students. It's so great to see all of you.
Mental and Diane Tonis-Cutter are mental and physical flexibility trained the same. In a way, you train the mental flexibility through exercises by doing transitions and turns and movements in places that are not in your dressage tests or that are not sort of the standard repertoire. But be creative and surprise the horse sometimes. I mean, give him warning and everything that watch out, I'm about to stop, watch out, I'm about to turn. But then get creative and don't ride just circles and whole school, but maybe ride a triangle or ride an oval or ride. There's so many different things you can do that I use in my lessons all the time.
Or turn in a weird place, turn in a place you don't normally turn, do things where you don't normally do them.
Exactly.
This makes the horse stay more aware and
I mean, if you think about it,
present.
one reasoning behind that is that dressage used to be a type of working equitation too, right? It had a certain place in the real world, like
Nor.
yeah. So the dressage was used for hunting and for parades, and it was used for battle and so on. And in battle, you don't know from which angle your opponent is going to come next, or in bullfighting, you don't know what the bull's going to do next. So your horse has to be mentally and physically flexible so that you survive, right?
Really present.
And I like to bring that a little bit to the dressage training too, that my horse should be able to turn anytime, right or left. He should be able to bend anytime, left or right. The horse should be able to do any movement, any transition, anytime. And if you can do that, the horse is perfectly trained, is fully trained, is finished, so to speak. But that's a high goal, it's a high standard that of course takes a very long time to reach, and usually it's like, well, I can do it some of the time but not at other times, and that's sort of real life. But that's the goal, and that's something you can keep in mind. It's like you can ask your horse a question: could I stop right here? Could I do a flying change and stop 3 canter strides later? Should be possible, right? Some horses like to take off after a flying change, and that's not so good. But then if you sometimes stop in unusual places, the horse will start to prepare himself mentally for that. He will start to expect that could happen. Or
he'll just stay listening more to you. Or if you go forward in a place where you normally would collect. And
exactly.
if you always ride your canter pirouette at a certain place, instead ride forward at that spot, or do something else. Turn suddenly the other direction. The horse will become a little sharper.
Exactly, and especially if you ride FEI tests, there is one test per level, and then you ride that test all the time. So it could be that the horse does it without you.
They learn it.
So you need to put some variation in that as well, and vary the tests. And exactly like Shana said, when the horse starts to do the pirouette before you and without you, then maybe ride forward or do something else. So variation, variability, flexibility is important, and we're going to talk about it actually in one of our upcoming talks.
Actually, Diane Turner-Sketter, said she gets into a rut riding by herself.
Everybody does.
And
everybody
we all do.
Everybody
all do.
does,
Everybody has experienced that, and actually, you might want to be here on December 26th. That's a Monday, the day after Christmas.
Right.
We're doing another Facebook Live on monotony kills, how to infuse inspiration and creativity into your writing. This is really about how to be creative with your exercises and patterns that you're writing.
Yeah, exactly. And it happens to everybody. It's a real danger, especially for like the professionals who have to ride many horses a day, teach many lessons. It's very easy to get stuck in a rut and just do the same thing every day with every horse, with every student. And it gets stale and it gets boring, and then the brain falls asleep. And it's
everybody, even if you only have one horse to ride, you get on the horse and you do what you did last time, or you did what you did in your last lesson, and it's just you get stuck.
So it's a challenge really for every rider, for every teacher, not to let it get stale, not to do the same thing in the same place in the same sequence every time, every day with every student, every horse. Oh, Sandy Kern, my favorite quote: "If you were riding into battle, you'd be dead."
I think that
I probably said that at some point.
Probably one of the things she said. Thomas used to say lots of things like that.
But anyway, so you can challenge yourself by trying to vary the lessons you teach, by trying to vary the way you ride. Sometimes you can pick a certain exercise, a certain pattern, and just let the student ride it and see what happens. And then it gives you ideas. You things go wrong, and then you have a starting point for a correction for another exercise that explains something to the horse and to the rider. Or if you're on the horse yourself, ride something. Just pick something that's actually kind of exciting too, to just decide, I'm going to ride this and that exercise today with whatever circles and squares and rectangles and triangles and whatever, and it always leads somewhere. You always make interesting discoveries, because
and oftentimes you have to modify it.
Exactly.
You can't ride.
Exactly.
You could pick a pattern, an exercise, one of our exercises in our GPS books, something like that, and you can pull it out and say, okay, I'm going to ride this, and then maybe you have to change things. I change things all the time.
I do too. it evolves. It takes on a life on it of its own. That's the interesting part. You can start with something, some exercise, whether you're writing or teaching, and then you see something, you feel something, you start changing something, you start adding things in, leaving things out, replacing
The
things.
horse needs something else somewhere,
Exactly.
or I just get kind of a flash of inspiration. I'm a very intuitive writer, so I get a flash and I go, oh, you know, right here, I think maybe turning right and then riding a volte left would be really good. And so I try that. I just follow my intuition, and often my intuition is right. It tells me, oh, the horse really needed that, and then I make that into a new pattern. It evolves that way.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be flexible too, even if you choose something that you want to ride and work on, and the horse feels like he's on a different page and wants to do something else. You may have to be sensitive to that and change your plan accordingly. And but the really best lessons and the best rides, they sort of have a life of their own. It's like you don't do it; it just comes through you. Like the ride just rides itself, and you're just sort of a conduit. And as a teacher, it's the same thing. Sometimes things just evolve, you know, in collaboration with the student. The student may also have an idea or a question or wants to pursue a certain train of thought, and then you say, okay, let's see what happens. You know,
let's go on in this journey together.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes it interesting. And like when I teach, I always like it if all three of us learn something. The horse, the rider, and me as the teacher. I've learned a lot from teaching, and I always try to teach in such a way that I got something out of it too. That I learned something, because otherwise I would have to kill myself if it's just monotonous and I could work for the post office, so
just
to
tell
speak,
people
and
to go
then
around and around
exactly
and around. What kind of life is that?
Yeah, that would kill me. So I always try to keep it interesting, and I try to make observations and learn something, basically see more connections and see more causes and effects in the horses and the riders.
Yep. So, do we have any other questions from anybody? We're getting lots of.
But we should probably wrap it up pretty soon too.
Yeah,
I
it's
would
been
think
a long
it's
time.
been a long time.
I have no idea how long.
Exactly. But we'll do this again. So.
Yep, we will.
More
I wanted
opportunities for
to
more questions.
remind all of you of a few things. We have a bonus PDF we have prepared for you. It's a summary and a checklist of all of this. It's actually an article that Thomas wrote, but it has a checklist in there. And it's really awesome. Go download it. It's at www.artisticdressage.com/bonus. If you have a problem getting that or you can't remember, I'll put it in the comments too when this is done. But if you have any problem, just message one of us or email us at ritterdressage@gmail.com, and I'll get it to you, no problem. I want you to have it. So that's the first thing.
Somebody told us to keep going.
oh, lots of questions.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Oh, more, even more.
Okay.
Hold on. You can't keep up.
How
24 to 20. Okay.
How do you plan training? Stay with the main topic for a few days, 2, 3, 4, until a certain improvement, then take a break, or change several topics every day? How many times? And then I can't read the rest because it doesn't continue. It doesn't show us.
Exactly, it doesn't show the rest of the book. Yeah, that's a good question. That could be a whole topic for another.
Yeah, actually,
show.
we could. We should.
It's a good one. That's takes a little thought.
Training strategy. It's a whole other thing to learn, and that would be a great topic for another Facebook Live, an article, a course, any number of things, because figuring out how to strategize the training and how to modify it for each horse, this is something worth learning.
I would let the horse guide that a little bit and go by feel. I mean, you can pursue a certain topic for a number of days, but you may find at some point that there's sort of
it expires,
diminishing return. Then the horse gets tired of it. You get tired of it.
Oh, this is great. This is the best exercise ever. I'm going to do it tomorrow. And the next day, maybe it's even better, maybe not. And the next day, maybe it starts to decrease. Right? And the horse needs something else. It's like you don't want to eat the same thing every day. You start to want something else.
It's a danger too that you get interested in something, you get focused on it, you pursue it, you work on that exclusively, and then you forget other things. That's one of the biggest challenges, that you don't become too one-sided. That is like not all collected work, not all lengthening, not all curved lines and lateral movements, but not all straight lines on a single track either. And then that
not all the favorite stuff, not all the stuff you love to ride too.
Exactly.
Sometimes you have to do the stuff you don't love to ride.
Yeah, so to keep checking every part of the body and every sort of topic in a regular enough sequence that the horse stays supple and he doesn't forget the answers to certain questions. That is a challenge for everybody, I think, because we all get sort of carried away with the stuff that's fun and interesting and that we're curious about at the moment. But you have to also do the things that you don't enjoy so much.
Sorry, everyone, about my fingers in the way. I have to. We're doing this on
scrolling.
my phone. Yeah, scrolling on my phone. I want to see if there's a way to get this all set up so that I can use my webcam on my computer. I think that might work better for the future, but I didn't get to it this time.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Nora. She says, I'm so looking forward to the clinics with you in the Netherlands coming spring. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we'll be in the Rotterdam area.
Yeah.
In spring and in the summer.
That'll be great.
Yeah, very good.
Yep. I think we should wrap this up, but I wanted to remind everyone, the bonus, if you don't know, don't remember that, just message me or Thomas will get it to you. And we have 3 more of these Facebook Live events scheduled around this Christmas period. This is our little Christmas thing that we're doing. And so on Tuesday, December 20th, we have the 3 toolboxes that every rider needs. On Thursday, December 22nd, we have to move up the levels, the 6 different types of exercises you need to use.
Yeah, that's very useful. It's a little different way of looking at things and exercises. I sort of have my own way of looking at things anyway. I always come from a slightly different angle. But it's useful. It's something that opens up the possibility, the gymnastic possibilities of
it's good stuff.
Arena patterns and dressage movements and so on, and combinations, and it makes you a lot more effective in your training.
Absolutely. And then on Monday, December 26th, the day after Christmas, Monotony Kills, how to infuse inspiration and creativity into your writing, and it's really about getting creative with your exercises and patterns. Yeah. Of course, there are other things you can do, like somebody commented, writing out, and absolutely, if your horse likes that, incorporate that into your writing. Exactly. This is really about into the training program within in the arena, how to get creative, so you're not just doing circles or writing the same old stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And so, the times. These are going to be, all of them are at the same time. 12 noon Pacific Standard Time, 3 o'clock Eastern Time, that's in the U.S., and 9 o'clock German time, Germany here, and anywhere else in the world, you're going to have to figure that out.
So,
look it up.
In the UK, it will be 8 p.m. exactly. Yeah. Australia, I think, is 12 hours ahead or behind of us.
Actually, Australia's big.
I know.
So, I tried to look it up because we have lots of fans in Australia.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I tried to look it up. I was like, oh no. Oh no, it's like the US. You can't just say Australia time.
Exactly. You'll figure it out.
So you'll have to figure it out. Yeah. So,
then, thanks a lot for listening and watching. Yeah.
And remember the bonus.
Hopefully we'll see you
there.
Tuesday, December 20th, the next one. So
thank you everybody for being here.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.